Hello and welcome to BTS of Life. I'm Evelyn Carter, and for over 70 years, I've watched the hidden struggles and secrets that quietly shape families. Today, I want to share a story that changed the way I saw my own family. A story of misunderstanding, unspoken tension, and the moment I realized how deeply some hearts can hold onto grudges. It's something I learned the hard way. Even after so many years, my husband's family hasn't truly accepted me, not even now. It all began on a crisp autumn morning when something unexpected came into my hands, something that would uncover decades of quiet resentment and finally make me confront the reality I had avoided for far too long. As I carefully opened the old envelope, the scent of aged paper hit me, bringing back memories I had tried so hard to forget. Inside was a letter I had never received. Its words, though faded, were sharp enough to cut through time. I held it in trembling hands, my mind racing. Why had this been hidden from me? Why had they kept this truth buried all these years? The ache in my chest tightened, the kind that only comes when you realize someone you trusted has quietly judged you without ever speaking. I could feel my heartbeat quicken as I realized this small piece of paper might finally answer a question that had haunted me for decades. I thought back to the countless family gatherings I had endured, where smiles were polite but cold, and conversations were laced with subtle judgments I could never name. Even my husband, though kind in private, seemed powerless against the silent rules his family had imposed. I had always wondered, in moments of quiet desperation, why they could never accept me, why my efforts, my care, my sacrifices had never been enough. And now, holding this envelope, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a flicker of anticipation. Perhaps today, at last, the truth would speak for itself. I unfolded the letter with shaking fingers, bracing myself for the weight of long-hidden words. The writing was meticulous, almost meticulous to a fault. And yet, every line dripped with judgment, disappointment, and the subtle sting of resentment. They had written as if I were invisible, chronicling every misstep I had supposedly made over decades. I felt a wave of disbelief. Had they really thought this about me for all these years? A quiet voice in my mind whispered that perhaps this letter was only the tip of the iceberg, and that what lay beneath would shake the foundations of my memories and my family alike. Memories flooded back like stormwater through a dam. The Thanksgiving dinners where I had cooked endlessly while being ignored. The birthdays where my contributions went unnoticed. The holidays spent trying to mend invisible cracks that never healed. I had smiled, I had endured, and I had hoped. But hope had its limits. Holding this letter now, I realized those quiet wounds weren't imagined. They were real, and if the words in this envelope were true, they might explain why, even after all these years, I remained a stranger in my own family's eyes. Memories flooded back like stormwater through a dam. The Thanksgiving dinners where I had cooked endlessly while being ignored. The birthdays where my contributions went unnoticed. The holidays spent trying to mend invisible cracks that never healed. I had smiled, I had endured, and I had hoped. But hope had its limits. Holding this letter now, I realized those quiet wounds weren't imagined. They were real, and if the words in this envelope were true, they might explain why, even after all these years, I remained a stranger in my own family's eyes. As I read further, the words painted a vivid portrait of resentment that had festered quietly over decades. They spoke of perceived slights, minor misunderstandings blown out of proportion, words taken the wrong way, intentions misread. It was exhausting to realize how little my efforts had mattered to them, how much had been judged without ever being addressed. I gripped the edges of the paper, knuckles white, as a wave of frustration and disbelief washed over me. How had I not seen this before? How had I not sensed the depth of their feelings? The letter was not just a revelation. It was a mirror reflecting decades of unspoken conflict that I had carried silently, believing perhaps I was imagining it. I remember the day my husband handed me the key to the attic, smiling softly, unaware of the storm about to break in my heart. I climbed the creaky stairs, dust motes floating in the sunlight, and found the box that had changed everything. Inside were letters, photographs, and notes, fragments of a life I thought I knew. My fingers trembled as I sifted through them, each item a piece of a puzzle I never realized I had been missing. With every document, a story unfolded of judgments, secrets, and grudges held in silence. And in that moment, I felt the full weight of the years I had endured, the smiles, the patience, the hope, now contrasted with the stark reality of what had truly been happening behind closed doors. Among the papers, one photograph caught my eye. My husband as a young man, smiling nervously beside his mother, who gazed at me with that familiar, cold expression. The image stirred memories I had long tried to suppress, dinners where laughter never reached my ears, holidays where I was the outsider despite being family by marriage, and quiet moments where my heart ached for approval that never came. A pang of sadness gripped me, followed by a spark of determination. I realized that understanding their resentment wasn't about blaming myself, but acknowledging the truths they had hidden. I needed to see the bigger picture, to confront the reasons they had never fully accepted me, and to reconcile my feelings with decades of silent judgment. The next letter was longer, almost a diary in its tone, detailing moments I had long forgotten, small interactions that had been misinterpreted, intentions questioned, gestures doubted. As I read, a mix of emotions surged through me. Anger at being judged unfairly, sorrow for the distance it had created, and relief that the truth, however painful, was finally visible. I realized that this story was bigger than a single slight or insult. It was a history of misunderstandings, assumptions, and unspoken biases that had quietly shaped every family gathering, every holiday, every moment of interaction. My heart pounded with anticipation, knowing that by understanding these hidden truths, I could finally make sense of decades of hurt. As I continued sifting through the letters, I found one addressed to my husband, written in his mother's precise handwriting. It outlined everything she believed I had done wrong, my choices, my words, even the way I laughed. Reading it, I felt a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. Could she have truly seen me that way for all these years? The letter revealed her subtle manipulations, the unspoken rules I had unknowingly broken, and the moments she had interpreted as defiance. My hands shook as I held it. For decades, I had tried to fit in to be accepted, and yet every effort had been silently catalogued, weighed, and found lacking. The truth hurt, but it also ignited a spark, a desire to understand and finally confront it. My mind wandered back to family gatherings, where I had felt invisible despite my constant efforts. The polite smiles, the quiet nods, the small sighs when I spoke, each now revealed in a new light. Every memory I thought was benign now carried the weight of judgment I had never seen. The letters were not just words on paper. They were a map of decades of silent resentment. I could almost hear the echoes of conversations, the murmurs behind doors, the subtle glances that had once left me questioning my worth. And now, finally, the hidden pattern emerged. A family's unspoken disapproval made painfully clear in their own words. I paused, holding a photograph of my younger self, standing nervously beside my husband at a holiday dinner. I remembered that evening vividly, the laughter around the table, the warmth that seemed to embrace everyone but me. At the time, I had smiled and laughed, trying to feel included, trying to belong. But the letter illuminated what I could not see. The subtle coldness in their eyes, the judgment masked by politeness. It was a painful revelation, realizing that my heart's desire for acceptance had been quietly denied all along. My chest tightened, and I felt both sorrow for the past and a strange relief that the truth, however bitter, had finally surfaced. Then a letter written in my husband's hand appeared, revealing his own struggles. He had tried to mediate, to defend me, but had been constrained by his mother's authority and the weight of family tradition. Reading his words, my heart ached for his silence, his helplessness, and the burden he had carried without telling me. I realized that some of the coldness I had perceived was not entirely personal. It was a reflection of the family dynamics, the generational expectations, and the invisible chains that had bound them. Still, knowing the reasons did little to ease the sting. The letters exposed truths that were impossible to ignore, demanding I reconcile my feelings with decades of misunderstanding. I remembered the holidays when I tried to bridge the gap. The dinners, the gifts, the small gestures of kindness meant to show love and acceptance. I had hoped they would see me, truly see me, as a part of their family, and yet the letters revealed that every effort had been interpreted through the lens of prejudice and expectation. I felt anger rise within me, but also a deep sadness for what could have been. Decades of strained smiles and careful words had kept us apart. Yet here I was, holding the evidence that explained everything. For the first time, I felt clarity amidst the pain, a chance to finally understand why acceptance had always been just out of reach. The next envelope was heavier, filled with more letters and notes I had never seen. One letter caught my attention immediately. It described events I had long forgotten. A family dinner years ago, a comment I made about a holiday tradition, the way I laughed at a joke, all recounted as evidence that I was different and outsider material. I felt my stomach twist. Could something so small have shaped decades of opinion? Yet the words felt deliberate, written with intent to judge. My hands shook, not just from anger, but from the realization that these hidden judgments had silently governed my entire family life. And suddenly, every cold look, every whispered word, every subtle exclusion made sense. The truth was harsh, but I had to face it. I remembered the first time I realized I was an outsider. It was subtle, a missed hug, a skipped comment in conversation, a glance that lingered too long. At the time, I thought I was imagining it, questioning myself unnecessarily. But now, the letters confirmed what my heart had feared. For years, I had tried to win their approval, to be family. But their perceptions were fixed, shaped by pride, tradition, and unspoken rules I could never follow. I felt a deep sadness for all the moments of hope that had ended in quiet disappointment. Yet, as I read, a strange resolve began to form within me, a determination to confront these truths and finally understand the reality of my place in this family. One letter revealed a confrontation I had no memory of, a meeting between my husband and his mother when I was away visiting relatives. They discussed my behavior, the way I interacted with family members, and what they considered my failings. I was shocked. The idea that my every action had been judged in secret, dissected, and cataloged for years was almost unbearable. I could feel the weight of decades pressing down on me. The quiet resentment, the coldness, the subtle rejection. It wasn't imagined. And as painful as this revelation was, it also explained so much. It explained the gaps, the tension, the moments where I had felt invisible despite my efforts. Now, I had proof. My eyes fell on an old photograph tucked into the envelope. It was from a family holiday, one I had remembered as cheerful. But now, looking at it with new eyes, I noticed the way my husband's mother avoided eye contact, the subtle expressions on cousins' faces, the silent judgment embedded in smiles. Memories I had cherished now carried a sting. Each flashback revealed how long I had lived under unspoken scrutiny, how carefully I had hidden my hurt, and how much I had yearned for acceptance that was never given. I felt a mixture of anger, sorrow, and a strange sense of liberation. Finally, the pieces were falling into place, no matter how painful the picture they painted. As I read another note, it became clear that my husband had tried to protect me. His words were gentle, apologetic, and full of quiet regret. He had wanted to defend me, to challenge his family's judgments, but had been constrained by years of family hierarchy and expectation. The weight of their influence had forced him into silence, leaving me to bear the brunt of rejection unknowingly. My heart ached for him, realizing that he too had been caught in a web of unseen tension. For the first time, I understood that it wasn't entirely personal. Some of it was tradition, some of it fear, and some of it pride. Yet, knowing this didn't lessen the pain. It simply made the truth undeniable. The letters revealed so much more. Instances where minor disagreements had been remembered as grand offenses. Moments where attempts at kindness were twisted into perceived slights. Each word stung, but together they painted a clear picture. I had been living a life under quiet scrutiny, evaluated silently and unfairly at every turn. The unfairness made my chest ache, yet I couldn't look away. The more I read, the more clarity emerged. It was a map of resentment and expectation, revealing how deeply entrenched these judgments had become. And I realized that to heal, I would need to accept the truth fully, no matter how uncomfortable it was. One particular note made my hands tremble. It detailed a moment where I had tried to connect with my mother-in-law, a simple gesture of care, which she had interpreted as overstepping. I could almost hear her voice in my head, the tone I had misread as neutral, but which was actually laden with judgment. I had never known that my efforts to belong were often misunderstood. My chest tightened with both sorrow and rage. The pain of being misjudged for decades was overwhelming. And yet, as I absorbed these revelations, I began to understand something crucial. Understanding the past was the first step toward freeing myself from it. A letter mentioned my husband's sister, the one I had always thought was indifferent but polite. It described how she had quietly undermined me at gatherings, spreading small comments that seemed harmless but were designed to isolate me. Reading it, my stomach churned. All those times I had felt awkward, excluded, or judged, I finally understood. It wasn't me imagining it. The words painted her actions in stark detail, each sentence a mirror reflecting the silent web of family tension I had been caught in. The betrayal stung deeply, but the clarity it offered also gave me a strange sense of power. Now, I could see the landscape of hidden truths clearly. As I continued, a note from my husband emerged, written with care and guilt. He had felt torn for years, wanting to defend me, but trapped by family loyalty and fear of confrontation. His honesty moved me. Tears pricked my eyes. I realized our love had been tested in ways I had never fully understood, and that his silence was not weakness, but survival in a difficult environment. I clutched the note, feeling a mix of sorrow and relief. For decades, I had blamed myself for not fitting in, for being different. Now, I understood that many of the obstacles had been beyond my control. Yet knowing this didn't lessen the emotional weight, it intensified it, demanding that I face the reality I had long avoided. I remembered a particular Thanksgiving years ago when the tension was so thick I could feel it pressing down on my chest. The laughter around the table felt hollow, the smiles polite but distant. I had tried to join in to belong, but each gesture was subtly rebuffed. The letters described this evening in painstaking detail, noting every minor misstep I had made. My heart sank as I realized that the invisible walls I had sensed all those years were real, and that my family had deliberately built them. I felt anger rise, but also a fierce determination. I would not let decades of silent judgment continue to define me. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. A photograph slipped out from between the pages, capturing a moment I thought I had forgotten. My husband and his mother standing side by side, smiling, while I hovered awkwardly at the edge of the frame. I could see the subtle dismissiveness in her eyes, the way she held herself above me. Memories flooded back. The quiet rejections, the ignored efforts, the whispered critiques I had overheard. I had tried to rationalize it, to forgive and move on. But now the pattern was undeniable. For decades, I had been navigating a minefield of unspoken rules, judged for actions that were never mine to control. The photo, simple as it was, became a symbol of everything I had endured and still had to confront. The next letter was from an aunt-in-law I had barely spoken to over the years. Her words were filled with subtle accusations, implying that I had never truly cared for the family or understood their values. Reading it, I felt a wave of disbelief. How could someone make assumptions so confidently without knowing my heart? The quiet injustice hit me like a physical blow. My mind flashed back to every interaction, every attempt at kindness that had been dismissed or misinterpreted. And yet, I also felt clarity. The letter revealed the system of judgment I had been navigating all my life, and for the first time, I could see it as a coherent, if painful, truth rather than random misfortune. I paused and took a deep breath, realizing the weight of what I was uncovering. Decades of subtle, silent criticism had been meticulously documented and hidden from me. The letters, photographs, and notes weren't just memories, they were evidence of a long-standing pattern. I felt my pulse quicken, part fear, part determination. Could I confront them with this knowledge? Could I finally reclaim my dignity and make sense of the pain that had haunted me for years? The answers were uncertain, but one thing was clear. I could no longer live in ignorance. The family's hidden judgments had defined me for too long, and it was time to understand, face, and perhaps finally heal from the truth. Another envelope contained a series of notes detailing conversations that I had unknowingly overheard fragments of. Each one illustrated a judgment, a critique, a plan to keep me on the outside. The words stung because they confirmed suspicions I had tried to dismiss. The cold looks, the whispered warnings, the subtle isolation. I clenched my hands around the papers, fighting tears. For decades, I had lived with questions I could never answer, wondering why I was never fully accepted. Now, the truth was laid bare, painful and unflinching. And yet, there was something empowering about this knowledge. The understanding that the problem was never mine alone to fix, that some grudges had been cultivated without my awareness. The letters revealed a long chain of misunderstandings, each one building on the last, forming an invisible wall I could never scale. My every attempt at love, kindness, and family connection had been scrutinized, reinterpreted, and dismissed. My chest tightened with the realization that I had endured years of silent judgment, believing perhaps that acceptance was just a matter of time. But the letters revealed it was never about me fitting in. It was about their rigid expectations and prejudices. The injustice burned, but alongside it came clarity. I finally understood why my husband's family had never truly embraced me. And I knew that facing this truth was the first step toward freeing myself from decades of unspoken pain. I came across a small note tucked into the corner of a photo album, barely legible with time. It detailed a casual remark I had made years ago, which had been twisted into evidence of my failure to belong. My hands trembled as I read it. Could such small words carry so much weight? All those family dinners, gatherings, and quiet interactions suddenly made sense. The polite smiles, the cold nods, the whispers behind my back, they had not been imagined. They had been carefully cultivated judgments, lingering in silence until now. The thought of having lived decades under this scrutiny made my chest ache, but I also felt a fierce determination. I would not let this define me any longer. I remembered my husband's attempts to shield me, subtle gestures, and quiet warnings that I had misunderstood at the time. His silence had not been indifference, but a reflection of the pressure he faced from his family. I realized that our love had survived years of tension, not because the family accepted me, but despite it. My heart ached for him, for the burden he had carried quietly, for the frustration of watching me misunderstood and judged. Now, reading these letters, I understood the dynamics in a way I never had before. Each revelation brought a mixture of sorrow, relief, and a fiery resolve to finally confront the reality I had lived under for so long. A letter from my mother-in-law detailed an event I had no memory of, a conversation about my behavior during a holiday visit. Her words were sharp yet formal, meticulously describing how my actions had disrupted the family harmony. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. How could decades of resentment be built on moments I barely remembered? The subtle manipulations, the silent disapproval, the carefully hidden judgment, all crystallized in her words. I felt anger, heartbreak, and disbelief surge through me at once. But I also realized something important. Understanding these hidden truths was a necessary step toward reclaiming my life and my peace. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Every letter, every note, every photograph told the story of a family whose expectations I could never meet. It was not a single slight, but decades of accumulated judgment, growing quietly in silence. I thought of all the times I had questioned myself, doubted my own worth, or tried to force acceptance where there was none. And now, the letters offered a painful clarity. It had never been about me failing them. It had been about them constructing a world I could never fit into. My chest tightened with sorrow, but also a spark of determination ignited. It was time to face the truth fully and finally understand the life I had lived under these hidden eyes. I remembered a small confrontation with my husband's brother, a passing comment that had left me feeling cold and isolated. At the time, I had blamed myself. Now, with the letters in my hands, I realized his words had been influenced by the same silent judgments that had shaped the rest of the family's behavior. Every perceived slight, every moment of exclusion, every whisper behind my back, it was all connected. My mind raced, piecing together decades of interactions into a coherent picture. The hurt was immense, but the clarity was empowering. For the first time, I could see the invisible chains that had bound my relationships and understand the root of the rejection I had endured for so long. a photograph fell out of the envelope, my husband smiling beside his mother, while I stood awkwardly to the side. The memory of that day flooded back. Laughter that didn't reach me, conversations that felt distant, and an unspoken tension I had never understood. Looking at the photo now, I saw the coldness I had ignored, the judgment I had rationalized away. I clenched my fists, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. And yet, I also felt a strange liberation. Seeing these truths in black and white allowed me to acknowledge them, to name the silent pain I had carried for decades. Finally, I could confront the reality I had avoided for so long. Another note detailed my mother-in-law's criticisms of my parenting style, her belief that I had failed to guide my children in the proper way. I felt a surge of disbelief and frustration. How could someone judge me without truly knowing my intentions or my heart? I reread the words again and again, the weight of years of misinterpretation pressing on me. And yet, amid the anger, I felt clarity. Her judgments, though unfair, had shaped the family dynamic I had been navigating silently. The letters were painful, but they were also illuminating. I began to understand the invisible forces that had dictated my family life and my relationships for decades. I paused, realizing how much of my own life I had spent questioning myself. The letters revealed that the rejection I had felt was not imagined, not a product of my insecurities. It had been real, meticulously nurtured over decades by the judgments and biases of people I had tried to love. The revelation was bitter, but it also empowered me. For the first time, I could name the forces that had shaped my life, understand their motives, and begin to disentangle myself from years of silent oppression. My mind raced with thoughts of what I could do next, how I might confront the past, and how I could finally reclaim my sense of self. One note described a holiday gathering in painstaking detail, highlighting every misstep they believed I had made. I felt a deep ache as I realized that my attempts at connection had been interpreted as failures. The letter painted a picture of a family trapped in their own expectations, holding grudges silently while expecting me to conform. My chest tightened, but I also felt resolve. I would not let these years of misunderstanding define me. I would understand, confront, and perhaps even forgive, not for them, but for myself. For the first time, I felt the possibility of peace emerging through the layers of judgment and resentment that had haunted me for decades. The envelope contained one final letter, written in a tone that was both formal and intimate. It described moments I had shared with my husband and his family, misinterpreted actions, and perceived slights. Reading it, I felt a storm of emotions: sorrow, anger, disbelief, and a strange relief. The weight of decades of silent judgment pressed down, yet I felt clarity forming in its place. I understood why I had never been fully accepted, why my efforts had seemed to go unnoticed, and why I had always felt a quiet distance despite being part of the family. And in that moment, I realized that understanding the truth, no matter how painful, was the first step toward reclaiming my life. I felt my hands trembling as I held the final pieces of the letters, the accumulated weight of decades pressing down on me. Each word, each photograph, each note revealed how deeply the family's silent judgment had been embedded in every interaction. I had always questioned myself, wondering if I had done something wrong. But now the truth was undeniable. It was never just about me. Their expectations, pride, and unspoken rules had built walls I could never scale, and yet, in the midst of sorrow and anger, I felt a flicker of empowerment. Knowledge was finally mine, and with it came the possibility of understanding, confrontation, and perhaps even healing. I remembered a long ago holiday dinner, the one where I had tried so hard to fit in. I had smiled, laughed at jokes, and brought a carefully prepared dish to share, hoping to bridge the invisible gap. At the time, I thought my efforts went unnoticed. Now, seeing the letters describing that night, I realized the truth. My gestures had been evaluated, judged, and dismissed. The realization was painful, but it also clarified everything. I could finally connect the dots, understand the family dynamics, and see how my experiences had been shaped not by failure, but by a system of silent disapproval that had persisted for decades. Tears streamed down my face as I held a photograph from another family gathering. My husband's mother stood behind him, smiling politely, while I hovered at the side, invisible. All those moments of feeling unseen, unheard, and unappreciated now made sense. The letters confirmed what I had long suspected. My family by marriage had never truly accepted me, despite my devotion, love, and sacrifices. I felt a mixture of sorrow, frustration, and determination. For decades, I had carried this invisible weight alone. But now, I had clarity and the understanding that it was time to confront the reality and reclaim my sense of self. I opened a letter that recounted a private conversation between my husband and his mother, one that I had never known about. It revealed how she had viewed me as different and outside the family circle from the very beginning. My heart tightened. All the effort I had put into being part of the family, the patience, the love, the countless gestures of care, had never been enough. I felt anger rise, but also a quiet resolve. Understanding the depth of their perceptions gave me power. I could no longer live in confusion or self-doubt. I now had the knowledge to process the pain and consider what steps to take for my own peace. I remembered the countless dinners, holidays, and celebrations where I had tried to fit in, often feeling invisible or judged. The letters detailed these events in ways I had never imagined, exposing a web of resentment that had built over decades. Each memory, once confusing, now made sense. The quiet glances, the subtle dismissals, and the whispered critiques were not imagined. They were intentional, chronicled silently over years. My chest ached as I realized how much I had endured, but I also felt clarity. The veil had been lifted, and I could finally understand the dynamics that had governed my life. This knowledge was painful, yet liberating. One letter described my husband's struggles in mediating family conflicts, his attempts to shield me, and the silent battles he had fought to maintain peace. I felt a surge of compassion and sadness for him. Our love had survived hidden tensions, unspoken judgments, and years of misunderstandings. Reading his words, I realized how entwined our fates had been with family expectations, and how much we had endured together without fully comprehending the depth of the challenge. The truth was now clear, and with clarity came the power to face the past, understand the present, and finally reclaim some measure of peace. A photograph of me with my children reminded me of the love and care I had poured into our family, despite being regarded as an outsider. The letters confirmed that my efforts had been silently judged, misinterpreted, and dismissed. My heart ached for the moments I had felt unseen, yet I also felt pride in what I had achieved against these invisible barriers. For decades, I had questioned my worth, my place, and my choices. But now I understood that the problem had never been me. The family's rigid expectations and unspoken rules had dictated the course of our interactions. Knowing this freed me to honor my own experiences without guilt or self-blame. I found a note detailing the subtle manipulations by a cousin intended to further isolate me from the family. Each example left me both shocked and vindicated. The moments I had felt dismissed or misunderstood now had a clear explanation. I realized how carefully these invisible rules had been maintained, shaping perceptions without confrontation. My chest tightened as I considered the weight of decades spent trying to belong. Yet, amid the hurt, I felt a quiet empowerment. Knowing the truth allowed me to release some of the self-doubt I had carried for years. The veil was lifted, and for the first time, I could see the situation with unclouded eyes. Another letter revealed the expectations I had unknowingly failed to meet, trivial in nature, but treated as significant offenses. The absurdity and intensity of these judgments left me stunned. Every gathering, every conversation, every gesture of goodwill had been measured against an impossible standard. I felt frustration, disbelief, and sorrow, but also clarity. Understanding these hidden rules was liberating, even if painful. I realized that acceptance had never been about my worth or intentions. It had been about navigating a labyrinth of long-held biases and rigid family hierarchies. Now, knowing the truth, I could finally separate their judgments from my own sense of self. I recalled a birthday celebration where I had tried to make the day special, only to feel quietly judged for minor mistakes. The letter detailed the family's perception of the event, twisting my efforts into criticism. I felt a pang of hurt, but also a spark of resilience. For decades, I had internalized their judgment, questioning my actions and doubting my worth. Now, with the letters in hand, I realized that their silence had been deliberate, their judgments premeditated, and in that realization, I found strength. The story of my life with them was clearer than ever, and I could begin to process the pain while reclaiming my own sense of value and identity. As I sifted through the final letters, a mixture of sorrow and anger surged through me. Each note seemed to whisper the same painful truth. I had been misjudged, misunderstood, and excluded for decades. Yet, as I read, I began to see patterns, not random cruelty, but a network of silent expectations and judgments that had governed every family interaction. My chest tightened, but a spark of clarity ignited. For the first time, I could disentangle my emotions from their opinions, see the long-hidden dynamics for what they were, and prepare myself for the confrontation and understanding I had avoided for so long. I was ready to face the truth head-on. One letter revealed a confrontation that never happened, a missed opportunity to explain, defend, or connect. The words painted a vivid picture of how their judgments had solidified over time, leaving little room for understanding or reconciliation. I felt the weight of decades pressing down, each unspoken criticism echoing in my mind. And yet, amid the heartbreak, I felt determination. Knowledge was my ally now, and I could finally see the forces that had shaped my life. The past could not be changed, but understanding it gave me the power to reclaim my peace, rebuild my confidence, and finally see myself as deserving of love, respect, and dignity. I reflected on the countless family gatherings where I had smiled through tension, endured quiet disapproval, and tried desperately to belong. The letters confirmed what I had suspected. I was never fully accepted. The truth stung, but it also freed me. For decades, I had carried self-doubt, wondering if I had been lacking or flawed. Now, I knew the reality. The problem had never been me. It had been the invisible barriers, the silent expectations, and the long-held prejudices of those around me. That realization brought clarity, sorrow, and a strange sense of empowerment. I could finally release decades of burden and see my own worth. A photograph of my husband and I, standing together during a family event, made me pause. I remembered the unspoken tension, the judgment lurking behind polite smiles. The letters illuminated it all, giving voice to feelings I had only sensed in fragments. My hands trembled as I held the image, my heart aching with both sorrow and relief. I realized that the love I shared with my husband had survived the storm of silent judgment and misunderstanding. That bond was unshakable, even in the face of years of unspoken resentment. And in that realization, I found hope. The past had shaped me, but it no longer had the power to define my future. Another note described the long-standing grudges held by family members, each small perceived slight blown out of proportion over decades. I felt the anger simmer, the frustration of years of silent judgment rising to the surface, and yet beneath it, there was clarity, an understanding that their behavior had never been about me alone. It was about their traditions, pride, and insecurities. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to acknowledge the pain, and to prepare for the next step, embracing the truth, accepting what I could not change, and finding a way to move forward with dignity and self-respect. The journey through these letters had revealed more than resentment. It had revealed resilience. I remembered quiet evenings sitting alone, replaying family interactions in my mind, wondering if I had been too sensitive or too flawed. The letters shattered that illusion. The rejection, the coldness, the unspoken judgments, they were real. They were not my fault. I felt a mixture of sorrow for the years lost and relief at finally knowing the truth. For the first time, I could see the invisible rules that had governed our lives, the silent expectations that had shaped behavior, and the grudges that had been carefully preserved. And with that understanding came empowerment. I could finally untangle myself from decades of unrecognized pain. One final photograph showed my husband's mother, smiling at a gathering while I stood at the edge, unnoticed. It was a visual confirmation of everything I had read. My chest tightened, but I felt a spark of resolve. For years, I had carried the weight of judgment, silently questioning my worth. Now, I understood the source. I also understood that this knowledge, though painful, gave me power. I could honor my experiences, recognize my resilience, and step forward with a clear mind and a steady heart. The past could not be changed, but my perception of it had. And with that clarity came the freedom I had longed for. I reflected on the letters, the photographs, and the years of memories they had brought to life. Each piece revealed a different layer of judgment, misunderstanding, and exclusion. The pain was real, but so was the clarity. For the first time, I could see my life with honesty, the love I gave, the challenges I endured, and the resilience I had cultivated. My heart ached, but I also felt a quiet pride. I had survived decades of subtle cruelty, misunderstanding, and unspoken resentment. And now, armed with the truth, I could finally begin to process it fully, acknowledge my own strength, and move forward with dignity. I placed the final letter back in the envelope and closed the photo album, a sense of closure washing over me. For decades, I had carried questions, doubts, and fears about my place in the family. Now I had answers, raw, painful, but truthful. The letters and photographs had exposed the hidden dynamics, the silent judgments, and the long-standing grudges. And yet, in that exposure, I found clarity. I understood why acceptance had never been granted, why efforts had seemed unnoticed, and why subtle rejection had been a constant companion. With this knowledge, I could finally reclaim my peace and honor my own journey through a lifetime of love, patience, and endurance. Sitting in my armchair, I looked around the quiet house, feeling a mixture of sorrow, relief, and empowerment. The letters had revealed decades of hidden truths, the invisible chains of judgment, and the reasons my husband's family had never truly accepted me. I felt tears, yes, but also pride for enduring, for loving, and for finally understanding. My story was no longer a mystery, no longer a source of silent pain. I had faced the truth, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my sense of self. Even after so many years, I realized that acceptance begins within. And as I closed the album, I whispered to myself, I am worthy, I am resilient, and I am free. Thank you for living this story with me. If you felt moved or inspired, don't forget to subscribe to BTS of Life so we can uncover more hidden stories together. Take care and keep your heart open.